Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold M. Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
Hi, this is Rabbi Ari Averbach. Welcome to Moral Courage, our podcast where we dive into the life and times and philosophy and theology of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis, who guided so many of us and taught so many of us. This week we have a conversation with Mayim Bialik. You know her from Beaches and Big Bang Theory and Jeopardy and Blossom, of course. We talk about her start in show business and how that overlapped in a beautiful way with her bat mitzvah. We talk about her relationship with so many incredible rabbis, including Rabbi Schulweis. And we talk about her experiences on college campuses, especially recently, which just feels so prescient right now. So here now is our conversation. You've done a lot about grief, about processing grief. How did
I did. I also wrote my father, Zichrono Livracha. My father passed away almost 10 years ago. And, a lot of people I would hear people joke about like Judaism really has grief figured out. They understand death. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just like the funerals are so intense. But experiencing it really, experiencing grief and participating in, I said Kaddish for a year. And like I did, I didn't do live music and I didn't wear bright colors. And, I did all those things. And I found it, really a very transformative way to experience that, and a real nod to religious tradition and our people's evolution over thousands of years of understanding kind of the human heart and the human spirit. And I think that one thing I love about being Jewish is this notion of being able to hold our mortality. We don't need to push it off. We don't need to ignore it. We don't need to shove it under the rug. We're very clear with death. We're very efficient about death. And there's also, a really beautiful process, which psychology, now agrees with in terms of, gosh, you don't just get over it the day someone's buried. The first month is spectacularly powerful. The first 3 months are different. It shifts over a year. It will continue to shift, but it's also the same every year. And so, that's what Yahrzeit is for.
Is there something in writing or speaking about processing grief that was surprising to you?
I mean, I was, as a writer, I was surprised. And, Esther Kostanowitz, who's, involved with many aspects of this podcast and also has been part of many parts of my life. As Esther has shown me, you can have a surprising amount of creativity come out of pain. And I was honestly surprised, how much the words flowed, and words flow for me about a lot of topics. I kind of thought they wouldn't around this, but they did. And so I chose to kind of keep sharing that.
And I thank you for it because it's helpful. It's helpful to use it as a tool and to point people towards that. We were lucky as an audience that you merged science and acting with Big Bang Theory. Like what a neat thing that when you came on that show, you go, oh, here's somebody who actually is part of this real world. Like, and it's weird. Has there been something that you felt merged your Judaism and your acting?
I mean, I wish I could say yes. Unfortunately, that hasn't materialized for me. No, the reason that I say that is I've tried to move forward a lot of Jewish projects. I've seen a lot of Jewish projects where they've chosen to cast outside of our community in ways that obviously are totally fine because anyone can play anything. But there's a certain sensitivity, I think, being a Jewish female around which roles we're allowed to play or how they want us to look in particular. And so I definitely have, some feelings about that. And also I'm, super proud of, women like Natalie Portman and Gal Gadot and, all the incredible Jewish actresses, Scarlett Johansson, who I get to tell people like, she's Jewish. Like, what? Yes, she is Jewish.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of love I have for, for kind of Jewish projects in the industry. And again, that's not to say that anyone can't play any part, but for sure, I always was hoping that some like great Jewish part would come to me. Um, but yeah, I guess just as my kids say, like every character I play has to be Jewish because it's me. Which I don't know if that's true, but I think it's kind of funny.
There's a certain amount that every actor brings into every part that they play. That like it doesn't matter who Tom Cruise is playing, it's Tom
Right.
Cruise. Like it is Mission
Well, or I
Impossible.
mean, right, or even like for a more Jewy example, like Jerry Seinfeld, like he's always Jerry Seinfeld,
Right.
um, and I do think, I think that you know, m- male Jewish actors are received differently than female Jewish actors for a lot of really interesting reasons. So yeah, I definitely think that there's that piece, but I think for my kids, they feel like I am like the face of Judaism, just like literally.
Yeah, but it is fun to play the game of like people who you don't think are Jewish to then go,
I
okay,
mean,
this
we literally had a book when I was a kid. More than one book in our home was
for
like,
sure.
guess who's Jewish? Which is like in the 80s, everybody thought those were great books to make. And now when I've shown them to my kids, they're like, that's racist. That's weird. And like, that's individualistic and particularistic. And I'm like, I just think it's awesome. Like,
Sure, sure. Have you seen on Hey Elma? Like every week they say
yeah. Oh,
they
I
like
love
who's
that.
Jewish, and like sometimes they get it wrong, and who's deciding who's Jewish and not.
Right.
But like here are people who don't look like you, me, Jerry Seinfeld, Albert Brooks, and Natalie
For
Portman, who
sure.
like you go, oh wow, here's somebody. I mean, I look at our
Yep.
religious school at our synagogue, and every class has at least one kid who like doesn't look Jewish in the way that like my
Whatever
Hebrew
that
school class when
means.
I was a kid.
Right. Right.
Um, and then post uh, changing gears maybe a little bit. You mentioned your activism around Israel when you were in college, which is I guess like right before the second Intifada, if my math is right,
Mm-hmm.
but still like tough
Uh,
right there. Um,
yeah.
since since October 7th, you've been groundbreaking in how you talk about Israel. And
Thank
I know some
you.
people are scared to do that. Some people just don't want to get political. I get it. Like my job is to be up there on the screen. What was that like for you?
I mean, I think like even before talking about sort of like what it's like to be a public person, like um I don't mean to be dramatic, but the world will never be the same, for Jews in particular, since
Yeah.
October 7th, meaning it rocked something very deep in our entire community, no matter what side of anything you're on. I also, think that for those of us who were raised with the Holocaust looming close, it can be extra special sensitive because honestly, like a lot of the fears that I was raised with, which I dismissed, seemed a lot closer on October 7th. I also have a lot of my family are religious Zionists, who made Aliyah in order to participate in, what they see as protecting the Jewish state. And a lot of their paranoia no longer felt like paranoia on that day because it was always, something that certain communities in Israel in particular said, like, it's coming. So that being said, I had to sort of decide, like, where do I end and this social media account begin? Because people who are not celebrities were posting about it because that's the way that people share things, right? It's the way people communicate. But I have a very large reach. And so, it didn't feel fair that I can't say a terrible tragedy has befallen the Jewish people today. What happened before Israel even went into Gaza was even more tragic, than I think what happened on October 7th, which was, cheering for the death and destruction. So, it continues to be a mind-boggling, painful situation. And I think that many people, yes, they are afraid, and they're afraid for good reason because it's so hard not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but we do know that Qatar, pays a lot of people to try and take down accounts and to post horrendous things on people's accounts. And so, I did have to turn my comments off eventually. Most of it is bots. Like it's not even real people. But you know, I don't think it is a crime to be Jewish, and I don't think it's a crime to be a Zionist. And apparently, we have a lot of educating people to do to let them know that Zionist is not a bad word. It means that you believe in the right of the the Jewish people to have a state that can defend itself. That's what Zionism is. It says nothing about a two-state solution or a one-state solution. It says nothing about the West Bank. It says nothing about the Golan Heights. It says nothing about the Sinai Peninsula. And it also says nothing about the populations of the dozens of Muslim countries or Arab countries all around the world. It says that we have a right to have a state and protect ourselves. So that is what Zionism is. And so that's honestly a lot of where I've had to sort of place my educational platform. But yeah, it's a scary time to be a public person. It's a scary time to be a public Jewish person. And there's a lot of really incredible people and organizations that work behind the scenes to try and give us some level of protection so that our home addresses are not leaked, so that our children are not put in danger simply because we believe that Israel has a right to exist.
Yeah. Did you ever go to the encampments at UCLA? Like, it's a great love of you geographically. No. Okay.
No, and it was really, it was so painful to see it, my campus. I mean, I did my undergrad and graduate studies there, so I was there for almost 13 years. No, it was incredibly painful, especially because, as I said, in the time that I was at UCLA, we had beautiful alliances with the Black Student Union, the African Student Union, with the Latino and Chicano student unions, with like all sorts of communities that we all, believed shared common interests, even if we didn't agree on everything. And to see that community kind of fall apart was really devastating. And, in addition, to be a liberal person and see, so many of my liberal brothers and sisters, just trying to defend Israel's right to exist while also wanting to maintain rights for the Palestinians, and to see that really dismissed simply because, I mean, I'm sorry, I think we can stop pretending. It's because people are anti-Semites, that they don't believe that we have a right to exist. So yeah, it was very painful, but no, it is not healthy for me to go those kinds of places, and it's not safe for me to go those kinds of places. And I also don't, need to introduce my own security concerns. I did go to a vigil. I went to a peace vigil with a Christian reverend and with a Muslim leader and with Rabbi Chaim and David Myers at UCLA. And so there were many places that we gathered to pray for peace. But yeah, ultimately I stayed away from some of the other complexity, which didn't, like I said, need more complexity on top of it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking. There's places that we can love that we currently don't feel safe, and hopefully that it changes, and there's people who have their own moral courage to help protect those who are protecting.
Yeah, I mean, my heart really went out and goes out to the students who are there, because for everything that we dealt with, and we had to wipe swastikas off, Bruin Walk when they were chalked there, and people were writing Rabin is Hitler and all those things. But I can't imagine being a student there right now. I had a kid who was a senior in high school during October 7th, and that was an enormous weight, for that student body, much less thinking about college students, who are trying to be autonomous and have an identity on a campus where they don't feel welcome.
Another place that we've seen kind of your courageous leadership is with mental health. That your podcast is huge. You're amazing, but you have incredible guests on there too. How did that come about?
I started the podcast with my partner, Jonathan Cohen. That's who's on the podcast with me. We realized that after COVID hit and when like lockdowns were happening and everything felt so scary, we realized that even though he and I had, decades combined under our belt of therapy and healing and ways to deal with anxiety, we were still feeling really, really scared. And, our mental health kind of started to take a plunge, as a lot of people's did. But what we realized is, if we were feeling that with all of the experience that we had and all the support that we're able to have, what about people who don't have access to that? So initially we began, as a podcast called Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, to kind of democratize mental health, to teach people the difference between panic and anxiety, to talk about different kinds of depression, to talk about different medications. But what kind of started happening is we started having all these guests, and people apparently liked talking to me and really wanted to open up about the things that worked for them in their own mental health challenges, what didn't work. And we had, celebrities and have kept getting celebrities and experts in the field. And it's been this incredible journey. We have, I think, more than 50 million downloads. I don't even understand what that means. Like, it's like such a huge number. But, I've had much of the cast of The Big Bang Theory on. We've had, people like Ben Stiller and Dustin Hoffman, like people who don't usually like do podcasts like that. We've had, great comedians like Chelsea Handler and Sarah Silverman and Eliza Schlesinger, and also some non-Jewish comedians. But it's been a beautiful journey. It's a place that I can use my neuroscience brain and also my love for introspection and my appreciation for the therapeutic process. And also, a lot of our podcast focuses on really having contact with something greater than yourself. Most people who have found healing have found it in realms outside of themselves. And for a lot of people, that's God. For a lot of people, that's a power greater than themselves. But, it's been a very interesting journey and a really healthy one for me and Jonathan as well, because we get to learn so much and we get to, kind of participate in our own education about our psychological healing while talking to some incredible guests.
Any big surprises from the podcast? Anything you heard, you've talked about, you're like,
Well, I mean, honestly, and like this feels like a good place to talk about it. I didn't know how important God was to people. And I didn't understand that even, non-religious experts, right, who don't personally have, let's say, a Judeo-Christian faith, how many experts are emphasizing the need for gratitude, the need for like understanding what prayer does to your brain, what meditation does for your brain. Like, these are things that, our tradition has been also practicing for thousands of years. It's just in many ways been lost for us commoners. Meditation, postures, these were all part of mystical traditions of Judaism. And many religious traditions, understand the notion of what a transcendental experience does for you. But the fact that we're learning the science behind that now is just really incredible. And it's been a special and unexpected aspect of our work on the podcast.
you write, you cook, you podcast, you parent, you like. I know we could break out all of our lives down into like 1,000 segments. You do a lot of it in the public eye. Do you have a sense as to either what's next or like what's a thing that you haven't done that you're like, ooh, I could try this weird other. Let me write
I
a
mean,
musical.
I think I think I've covered, most of the bases, in terms of
Yeah,
large things to tackle. I wrote a screenplay and I directed for the first time. It's a movie
yeah,
called As They Made Us that came out a couple years ago with Dustin Hoffman and Candice Bergen and Simon
yeah.
Helberg and Diana Agron. So that was actually a really incredible experience. Right now I'm getting one kid off to college and my other is starting high school. And so my kids were homeschooled their whole life. So right now I'm sort of learning to, manage the massive number of emails that I get from my children going to a Jewish private school. It's kind of insane. So yeah, right now I'm sort of mastering the art of doing less, which I think is really important. I am focusing on, kind of more of my mental health and also my physical health. Like, ladies who have autoimmune conditions, we just have a real special journey post menopause, just everything changes. So yeah, doing a bit more of, trying to figure out the things that I really love doing and doing more of them. Being part of this podcast, honestly, is an example of something that, like, if I tune in and say, do I really want to do this? The answer is yes. And so I'm going to be part of it, and I'm going to be helpful to it in any way that I can. And that's just true. Like, I didn't even expect to say that when you asked me this question, but that's kind of what a bit of life is like now. I mean, sure, I have things that I'd like to learn to do. Friends of mine are talking about how pottery has been amazing. Like, they have these pottery studios and like, so, but I don't think I'm going to be like a world-class potter. I'd like to spend more time, doing the things around my house and straightening up and like playing the piano and being with my kids.
Yeah. And so I'm grateful that you're part of this podcast, that you're part of the whole journey here. Um, what's something you're learning, right? Is there a Jewish text that has guided you, that's brought you questions over and over? Your first piece of Talmud you sat and learned with
Oh
somebody?
gosh. That's a great question. The first formal learning that I did was like halacha. Like I literally wanted to learn like the halachas of Shabbos. I wanted to learn about Taharas and Mishpacha. That's, I mean, family purity is the strangest translation. But I wanted to learn about the rules surrounding women and like where did they come from and why are there rules about periods and things like that. So I actually started with a very, kind of like technical sort of learning. I'm one of my mentors is Shep Rosenman, who does a tremendous amount in kind of like the Jewish world, and so he writes songs for every psalm, like songs that have been inspired by every psalm. And
Wow.
I started working on one with him actually right before October 7th. We had started working on. I cannot remember which one. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I don't know. I was just in shul for Tisha B'Av and was actually at a Valley Beth Shalom, a Dad Ariel joint service. And I don't know, it just feels like every text you can just keep turning over and over and over. It was aspects of Eicha that I hadn't, thought about that way. And so, yeah, I don't really have one thing I can focus on in particular. I do love Pirkei Avos. That's how do you translate it in English? The ethics of our fathers. Um, but Pirkei Avos is this kind of lovely little collection of aphorisms and sayings, and it's one of sort of my favorite sort of guidelines for Jewish thinking and Jewish thought. So I'll probably send my son to college with a good Pirkei Avos translation.
Sure. You've talked about, you mentioned at the beginning the idea of patriarchy in religion, which I get. You've also talked about some of your great Ravs, who, I might be mistaken, they were all that I can think of men, except for Judy, who's amazing. Her
Yeah, there
sister.
weren't a lot of women rabbis when I was a kid.
No,
I mean, Laura Geller, I
okay,
actually I taught at Temple Emmanuel where Laura Geller, I think, was the second woman ever ordained. She was the rabbi.
yeah.
And I would sometimes chant there for high holy days. But yes, lots of dudes.
But part of it is like, how do you read these things like family purity and other things that are supposed to be, and go, okay, how do I find my feminist, or at least like not even feminist, if we don't want to say that
Yeah.
word, but even like a real world application of this for 21st century
Yeah.
people?
I mean, it's a great question. I've learned from male rabbis who I'm diametrically opposed to in many important regions of life. And I've, learned from male rabbis who are more empowered and educated feminists than I am. So I've learned from all different kinds of men in particular. And I've also learned from some, incredible women for sure. I'm, part of the Ikar community. So obviously Sharon Brous and yes, I've also learned from Reb Mimi Fagelson and Sarah Hurwitz. So there's many women who have also been part of my journey. But I think that the most important aspect for me is that learning for learning's sake is important, even if I don't agree with everything I'm learning. And for me, part of understanding what I want as a Jewish woman is understanding where the structure came from, why some of the rules were made, and also I don't want to say how we break them, but how we understand them in a modern context. So there are many things that I chose to embrace, which a lot of women don't like to. And it's not simply just sort of whitewashing, halachic Judaism or traditional Judaism, but there are ways, to understand mikveh in a context that is healthy. And many women have not been introduced to those ways, which I understand. For me, I understand the halachic principles behind women not being witnesses. And also I have to believe that the way Judaism is progressing, we are having conversations about this. The problem of agunot, of women who are chained and stuck in marriages because their husbands will not grant a divorce, is it's a disaster for the Jewish community, no matter what denomination you are. And I know that there is work in progress to try and address the status of agunot. So we still have a ways to go, but as Rabbi Sarah says, we literally don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. If you love Judaism, if you love aspects of traditional Judaism or halachic Judaism, there are ways to celebrate that and to live within it if you choose to. And for other people, they absolutely don't have to follow halacha. That's okay. But it's important for me to understand the reasons behind some of these limitations and restrictions, and then find communities where I feel welcome. And I think, like 10 and 10 and all these incredible communities are understanding the needs of not just women, but the communities that women live in, for women to have a voice and to be important. I've definitely sat in sermons by female rabbis or been in services with female rabbis that I didn't like. I've also been in a lot of services with male rabbis that I really didn't like. So I don't paint with that broad of a brush around this. If you're intellectually rigorous, if you're compassionate, if you understand the structure of Judaism in a way that makes sense to me as a congregant, I'm happy to sit in your congregation. And I think that women should not be held to different standards than men are in that sense. So whatever floats your boat is going to be what works for you, whether the rabbi's male, female, or non-binary.
I feel very lucky that in my upbringing, I grew up at VBS with Schulweis and then Feinstein, among a lot of other, there was a lot of rabbis there. And then when I was like rediscovering my Judaism in my 20s, I found myself at Ikar. And there I
Mm-hmm.
was like learning at the feet of all these people you mentioned. And then to go to Ziegler.
Yeah, and I should mention, Rabbi Ronit, who has left Ikar and has gone on to other places. Yeah, we have Rabbi Hannah Jensen at Ikar, who I think is one of my favorite intellectual minds right now. So yeah, it's a very special community. Los Angeles is really blessed.
With the world as it is now, which feels so broken, although maybe it always has. Maybe this is the way it's always been, and we just feel it more now because we're here right now. Can you imagine what the world needs? How to respond to this?
Yeah, I think it's a great question as we're talking about moral courage because, in many ways, Rabbi Schulweis, as you said, was so ahead of his time. You know, not only in thought but also kind of delivery and execution. And I think, if we were to think about like what would Rabbi Schulweis do, he definitely would not spend his time fighting with bots on social media. He would not spend his time, trying to change individual minds who are so clear that they are not seeking to learn more. They are seeking to be right and to denigrate the Jewish people. What Rabbi Schulweis would do would be get into action and be part of movements that are significant and helpful and supportive. One of Rabbi Schulweis's, a beautiful feature of, his presence as a rabbi was also his celebration of joy and understanding the importance of kind of Jewish continuity, even in difficult times. So I kind of think there's two pieces here that we can like wring our hands and fight with people all day on social media. But what's important is sort of getting back to some of the sort of basics of Judaism, which in many cases do revolve around the community, where it meets, what are the joyful places, what are the musical places, what are the culinary places that we actually have a Jewish identity. And on the other side of that, moral courage looks like being part of communities that are looking to make significant change with advocacy, with legislation. Those are the places I think that Rabbi Schulweis would be directing us, like I said, and not fighting with people. You are not going to get anywhere with fighting individual people who hate Jews. That's not the place to try and educate people. So that's sort of where I feel the courage comes from.
I love that, right? Like, I was warned that during this conversation I'd fall in love with you, and so you're amazing. But also, this idea of trying to fight this brokenness by bringing joy. Right. You're not going to fight the brokenness by fighting more. You're going to fight it by, right,
Mm-hmm.
the culinary experiences, the singing and the dancing and the joy. And how do we fall in love with Judaism, with the world, with each other? One of my favorite teachings by Rabbi Schulweis, I think he did this at Camp Ramah in the Finger Hut Chapel, was he noted that of all the words to describe God, we've been raised in a world where God is omnipotent and omniscient, all knowing and powerful, and all of these big ideas. And in the most well known line of the Torah, Shema, your first sentence, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Of all the things we can call God, it is unity. It is
Mm-hmm.
one. And so for us to strive for that and to work towards that, to uh, rodef, to chase after the idea that we are together, we're united, we're one, is maybe how beautiful that you brought in this like Schulweisian end for us.
No, and the fact is, like when I think of the work that Rabbi Schulweis did, how he changed the face of a lot of aspects of people's Jewish identity by saying what happens everywhere matters, what we do matters everywhere, right? And this notion that hate can't drive out hate, only love can do that. That is what Jewish World Watch was designed to introduce us to, right? And that's true for kind of all aspects of our life.
You've been incredible and so generous. I feel so lucky to have gotten to learn with you and talk with you over this past little bit. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of this podcast in a really big way. It's really incredible.
Thank you. I mean, honestly, it's an honor to talk to you, who learned at the feet of Rabbi Schulweis. It's a very special legacy, and I'm just so appreciative that you exist and that you're furthering his legacy in this way. So we're very appreciative, and so nice to get to talk to you.
You too. All right. Hope to see you soon. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky-Weiser at SadClown Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.org.